Hey, welcome to another installment of Pasty White Dude with a Camera. Music lessons. So this is part 2 of just music evolution, practice evolution stuff. Basically, the questions we're going to talk about today is how do you know if you are getting the most out of your practice? How to know if you're hurting your abilities, and how to know if you're hurting them more than you're improving them, and what you should be focusing on when you're practicing or playing, and some other shit. So if you want to know how you might be hurting your abilities while you're practicing, so you think you're getting better at something, but you're making other things worse. It usually comes down to technique, mental technique, and since spirit is unquantifiable, I'll just consider mental technique and spirit the same category. But it usually comes down to those. It could also apply to rhythm, but let's not talk about that just yet. So, these are the ways that you can hurt your playing while you're practicing. So with technique, basically if you let yourself start playing sloppy and you know you're playing things inaccurately and you're just missing notes and stuff, I don't know what to tell you except you're literally teaching yourself wrong. There's a time and place to try things that you're not capable of doing and to reach beyond your abilities. Sean Lane talks about how he basically played really fast and sloppy and then cleaned it up. So it may be important to let yourself be sloppy sometimes when you're just trying to get faster and then to clean it up. But for the most part, when you let yourself be sloppy, you're just training yourself to play wrong. Your brain doesn't really understand that you played something wrong. You kind of just teach yourself wrong every time you do something wrong. It's pretty much that simple. And then with tension, basically same thing. Like, your brain doesn't know what to wire in and what not to wire in, because how would it know that? So if you play and your shoulders are always tense, or your thigh is always tense, or your hands are always tense, that stuff matters, and your brain will basically associate playing guitar with those tensions, and they'll just become habitual. If you really want to understand tension and releasing tension, you have to dive into Alexander technique. The reason I can't do a good job of explaining it is it's kind of like explaining colors to a blind person. Basically, you're kinesthetically blind if you haven't already studied Alexander technique. I've just begun studying Alexander technique, and it's already opened my mind so much in regards to tension. Probably wondering, what the heck is Alexander technique? Well, luckily I found this piece of paper that says all you need to know. Well, you can only truly know by taking lessons from a teacher. It's kind of a Zen principle. You can only know if you already know. You gotta take lessons. You can't just read books. It's not good enough. It relates to posture, movement, muscle tension, breaking bad habits, and how you use your body. That's a really big principle in Alexander. Your use. How you use your body. I mean, if you have all this tension, and you probably do, well, why are you holding so much tension? Don't you control your body? Some of that stuff's in your subconscious. But Alexander technique shows you how to consciously control it. And just because I said it relates to posture doesn't mean you can just sit up straight and that'll fix the problem. In most cases, that's just going to make things worse. It's kind of like physical therapy, but shows you how to not damage your body rather than repair damage. I mean, a lot of people do end up taking Alexander lessons because they have an injury. It definitely helps you if you've had an injury, and it helps you recover. But it's a lot better to just prevent injury than to have to heal it. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's very zen, subtle, and nuanced. Don't you like it when I just read the words to you? It's pretty subtle. If you saw me working on Alexander technique, you might think it's kind of dumb. It's a way of increasing kinesthetic awareness and control. Pretty much everyone has no understanding of this stuff. There's that movie, The Sixth Sense. We already have six senses, at least. The sixth sense is just a body mapping. It's a kinesthetic awareness and a mapping of your body. Your brain always knows where different parts of your body are. Now that has become weak in modern societies, but it doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be. Anyways. A word of warning to all you professional musicians out there that are too stubborn. Basically, you're really risking some serious injuries if you play music all the time and you don't understand Alexander technique. Knowing what I know now, I would never go back. I mean, you want to play the rest of your life, don't you? You gotta understand how your body works and how your muscular skeletal system all intertwines and works together. Otherwise, you're just risking hurting yourself. If you're curious about Alexander technique, I highly recommend this book. This book talks about how Alexander technique was discovered. It talks about the author's personal journey with Alexander technique, and it really just discusses why it's important. This book really sold me on the idea, and I think it might sell you as well. If you want to learn how to balance a baby with just one hand, you gotta get this book. Baby sold separately. Anyways, this book's great. I really like this book. And this is another really great book for learning Alexander technique. You still need a teacher, but this book is pretty beginner friendly, and it's great for musicians learning the technique. I'll put links in the description. You got babies, some words. You're basically leaving skill on the table if you don't study Alexander technique. Now, some of you are going to bring up the point that a lot of the best don't study Alexander technique, and that's a great point. They can still benefit by studying Alexander technique, but they won't benefit quite as much as you will. If you don't have amazing technique, you should assume that you can benefit quite a lot. Yeah, I'm going to stop talking about this now, but if you're really driven, do this stuff, and the rest of you, just leave me alone. So that pretty much covers technique. You just got these two things. And with the rest of it, we pretty much talked about it in the last video. If you don't like what you're practicing and you habitually hate playing, you're hurting your most fundamental level of connecting with music. So be careful. It really comes down to a few questions. I mean, you gotta ask, am I dreading my practice sessions? Are you excited to practice? Would you like to put it off for another hour or so? Are you bored while you're practicing? Or are you addicted to practicing? Do you lose track of time, or are you counting down the minutes until it's over? If you're enjoying your practice, you're fostering a good mental habit, we'll say. But if you constantly hate your practice, you're fostering bad mental habits. And sometimes it's worth it. I think there is a lot of value to practicing things that are very difficult. And a lot of the stuff that makes you a lot better in the shortest amount of time is just the hardest stuff to work on. It's a pretty standard thing in the universe, you know, like if you want to get in shape really fast, it's gonna suck. I would know because I'm really ripped. The thing is, if you're gonna be practicing things that are very difficult, you're risking hurting your mental connection because you might dread your practices, you might be bored, but it still might be worth it because basically you can raise your playing a certain amount while hurting it to a lesser degree. So, here's what it's like when you work on the hard stuff that is very important to work on but you might hate. So let's assume that you hate this the whole time. So you got skill, time, the hatred is there the whole time. Let's say you don't do all that stuff I said about faking it till you make it. In the beginning, basically, it just takes a bit for you to see progress and for it to stick. When you don't see any progress, just stick with it. As long as you know you're working on something that's very important, those results are going to kick in. And when they do, you're going to get a lot out of it. This is why I think it's beneficial to work on stuff you hate sometimes. Because you might hate it and it might hurt your connection with music like this much, but you'll be getting this much improvement and that'll kind of cancel this out. Especially when you go to play and you notice that you've improved so much and things are so much easier, you will learn to love working on that stuff at least a little bit because you'll just be so excited with your improvement. But then eventually things plateau, and when those improvements start tapering off, that's when you really need to be concerned with whether or not you're hurting your connection with music, because when you're not getting much out of that practice and you're only hurting your connection, you're probably hurting your connection this much and getting this much out of your practice. So the balance is flipped. And so if we go back to the thinking about flow, in this area you're going to be bored now. And so you need to increase the challenge or just work on a different weakness. There's always something that you can be improving, and improving in a smart way so that you improve quickly. Right, Boone? Remember, just try and get back in the state of flow. If you're practicing that really tough stuff, you're risking hurting your mental connection. But I think in a lot of cases, if you're working on the right stuff, it's worth it. So let's talk about what that stuff is. So, like I said, the important stuff to work on is pretty much from here down. The thing is, with technique and notes, basically, it requires a lot of brain power to just drill in some information. Like, with guitar, it's not easy to tell what note you're on the fretboard. So you gotta just drill that stuff in. And with technique, like, it's not always gonna be fun working on technique. You gotta get that stuff good. And I'm not a master with that, but with technique, the main takeaway should be that your brain doesn't understand if you're doing something right or wrong. It just wires that connection in. So be cautious of doing things wrong. This is why teachers talk about going extra slow. I practice basically in slow motion a lot of the time. And you gotta teach yourself how to play clean. Now, the real question is whether or not you should be clean and then slowly build that up to get fast, or if you should be fast and then learn how to play clean. That's for another day. But for now, just know that you need to learn to be accurate and consistent and reduce tension. With notes and harmony, you gotta know what scale degrees you're on, you gotta know what note name you're on, and how that relates to the chord you're on, all that kind of stuff, and you gotta connect it to your ear. Some people might like working on that. I personally hated it, but I work on it in a way that I improve very quick, meaning I do the hard stuff, and that just excites me to get better. But it's pretty hard and tedious to work on. With rhythm, I think rhythm actually helps your mental technique. If I do all Victor Wooten's exercises from his book on rhythm, I get so focused. One of the best ways I can reconnect with my mental technique is through rhythm. I hope at this point you at least realize that not all practice is created equal, and some is just drastically better than the rest. It comes back to the Pareto inefficiency. And just look it up. I don't really think most people that are on top are that much more talented. I don't really believe in that. I think most of them just work on the right stuff. And then we talked about this last time. If you're constantly distracted, you're just wiring your brain to be distracted when you play. Stop that. I started practicing while watching YouTube videos because of Victor Wooten's book. That's one of his revelations. And I think that's great for learning specific technical things. Once you already have the motions down, kind of just getting it into your subconscious. But then I just let myself always practice in front of YouTube videos, and then I basically started associating distraction with playing music, and I really didn't find any enjoyment out of playing. Now, while I did lose my connection with music for a while, I did regain that connection by really making sure I'm focused in the practice room and meditating, things I said in the other video, making up games. So if you lose your connection, you can always get it back. Be careful about practicing in front of the TV or in front of YouTube and all that stuff. It can be helpful, but you gotta be really careful. And then, like I said in the other video, just limit your use of social media. I know that stuff's great. And I said in the other video that one of the easiest things you can do is to stop using that stuff so much. It was actually quite difficult. I was kind of lying. But don't let your attention span become like everyone else's. You gotta train it. Let's see if you can see this little app here. It's called Kidslox. I use that to basically keep myself off of my phone. It's hard to see, but there's a little lock. Log in. It's made for parents that don't want their kids on their phone too much. Let's see if you can see that. Basically, I just put it on child mode, and you can choose what to lock yourself out of, but I generally lock myself out of the internet and YouTube. I don't have Facebook on my phone. I keep myself off of Instagram. I'm serious, man. That stuff will hurt your brain. Be careful. Like I said, we talked about in the other video, poor diet. It's pretty much proven at this point that if your gut biome is unhealthy, then your brain doesn't function as well as it should. So just get healthy. There's plenty of really unhealthy, incredible musicians, and I don't think you should take after them. Well, I think it is great to learn from the greats. I don't think you should always emulate everything they do. The fact that they eat total garbage is not their secret to success. The fact that they mainline heroin is not the secret to success. So the other areas you can hurt your playing, if you just over practice, you can injure yourself, and it sucks. Right, Putin? You should start to get rid of subpar practice from your routine, because if you think about injury, injury just comes from over practice and practicing in the wrong ways. And in regards to over practice, it's a lot easier to over practice than you might think. And to get really good, you gotta be obsessive, which kind of sucks because you can't really consistently put in 8-hour days because your hands are gonna take the toll, or your embouchure or whatever. So you gotta practice smart and then practice hard. Practicing smart is more important. When you find a practice that's no longer serving you, gotta flush that stuff out. Oh yeah, and then we talked about this in the other video. You don't have as much time as you think. I mean, yeah, there is a lot of time, but you're just gonna get worn out if you've been practicing for 5 years, 6 years, and you're just not making progress. Those people always give up. Just focus on the things that are important and really get the most out of your practice, because it'll give you more energy. It'll excite you to see progress. I'm not saying it's inherently wrong to practice licks all the time and only practice what you like, but it can't be the only thing you work on. I apologize for only being able to briefly touch on all of these subjects. Each subject deserves its own video, or a few videos at least, but I just wanted to cover the general topics that I needed to cover. You'll have to dive deeper into each subject on your own, but surface level understanding will never cut it. Just be more diligent. Your skills will stick better if you just put in more work and learn the more difficult to learn stuff. I know I haven't really talked much about evolution and those original concepts I talked about, but basically, if you take the time to deeply understand and harmonically analyze what you're doing, rhythmically understand what you're doing, and be absurdly tight rhythmically and have great technique. I know I'm still just speaking in broad terminology, but if you understand things very deeply, then you'll be able to relate anything you're doing to something else, and your skills will then have reproduced into other areas of your playing. So instead of just working on a lick, now working on that lick all of a sudden turns into knowing how to play over any minor chord, and then maybe you can turn that lick into a dominant chord lick, or change the time signature. The more time you take to learn things in depth, the more it'll spread into other areas of your playing, and you'll just notice that you get better at a lot of things that you weren't working on specifically, just from having a more in-depth approach. So that's the secret for making your practice evolve and having your playing evolve, because of how you practice. And if you practice in really surface level ways, you're not going to evolve, and your skills, they might just die. And it is possible to make yourself worse while practicing. So be very careful. You want your skills to evolve into other areas of your playing and not kill off all those other areas of your playing. I hope I've made my point. Good luck, and make sure to hit the thumbs up, leave a comment. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I want to know if I am. And you can check out my band, Rusa. You can just follow me on Facebook, all the stuff. And that's about it. Until next time.